viewers, and welcome back to Media Scan, your weekend dose of headlines, controversies and perspectives. With second phase of COVID vaccination in full gear and hectic electioneering in 4 states, this was a week of interesting headlines but also some needless controversies. We will come to all of that, but first, what made news? Vaccine data for the all-important second phase is ready to touch 2 lakh jabs as our senior citizens and those with comorbidities lined up for protection against COVID. Seeing that vaccine hesitation is a thing of the past, the government has done away with all the restrictions on timings since eagerness for registration was much better than expected. Meanwhile, with Indian vaccine arriving in dozens of countries, messages of gratitude continue to pour in from the world over. The opposition was all but decimated in Gujarat when results for the local body polls were declared earlier this week. Just like the municipal corporations, BJP swept the district and taluka panchayats as also the municipalities. Congress lost much ground this time, while the Aam Aadmi Party made its presence felt marginally. After the so-called G23 openly challenging the top leadership, the split in Congress continued to create headlines, this time over West Bengal. Anand Sharma questioned the wisdom of allying with ISF in the state, which he calls a blatantly communal outfit. This led to a public spat with Bengal Chief Adhir Chaudhary and others. As I said, hectic campaigning is on in the 4 election-bound states and 1 union territory. In West Bengal, much media airtime was devoted to the possibility of a direct contest between Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee and her one-time aide, but now BJP leader Shubhendu Adhikari. While far south in Tamil Nadu, VK Shashikala, who had created a flutter after her release from jail, created another flutter by announcing her withdrawal from politics. Speculation is rife and still on. Good news from the world of economy. Indian economy is out of negative zone by fighting over the COVID impact and now ready to bounce ahead. Exiting recession, GDP grew at 0.5% in October-December quarter. Both agriculture and industrial sectors showed acceleration. Moody's has already predicted India's growth at 13.7%, while IMF has pegged our growth rate at 11.5% in FY 21-22. So after those headlines of the week, it's time to take up one of the most important issues that generated a lot of reaction and even some backlash from the people in India. I'm talking of the Freedom House report generated in the US, which attempted to downgrade India's position from free to partly free. Who are these people who generate these reports? What is the diversity of their panels? What is the funding structure? Who decides these reports on the basis of what ground reporting that they get? Are they connected to the grassroots in the country? Why are they always trying to target India and malign our democratic system, even as India continues to make strides in progress? Why are Indians angry with this report? To understand these and many other questions associated with the issue, so let me first introduce you to my guests, and then I shall open it to them so they get an ample opportunity to explain the various aspects, the myriad questions associated, and what it means for the future of the country. I have here with me Mr. Prabhu Dayal, a noted diplomat, also served in the US for the government of India, and now a well-known analyst commentator. Welcome, Mr. Dayal, and very warm welcome to you for your first appearance on our show, Media Scan.
Thank you very much.
I also have with me an old face on Media Scan. You have seen and heard him here on the show, a friend and a very incisive, very sharp analyst, commentator, well-known social media face, Karthikeya Tanna, connected to me straight from the US. Welcome back, Karthikeya, and I hope you have read the report.
Thank you.
Let me just open it up to both of you and we shall have a healthy discussion, I am sure. I'll come to Mr. Prabhu Dayal first. Mr. Dayal, before I come to the nitty-gritties and the finer points in the Freedom House report, I have one fundamental question to put to you, sir. My straight question to you is, how do you look at these, not just the Freedom House, all such reports which keep emanating from the Western world, and they invariably land up in controversies because people think they do not understand the sensitivities and the conditions of our country. Do you prescribe to the view? Your take, sir.
Smitaji, I must say that you have yourself given the answers in your introduction.
Yes.
Who are these people who issue these reports? Who is financing them? Who are the members who write these reports? Who are the people whom they reach out to?
Right.
In other words, the entire report making process or the report writing process is very dubious in nature. And as far as I'm concerned, I have no doubt whatsoever that these reports are written with a political agenda in mind. Now,
Allow
let
me
me
a cross
submit.
question, sir. Allow me a quick query here.
Okay.
If you think, and being a diplomat, a career diplomat, if such is your view, that there are always dubious elements behind these reports, how come they manage to get so much traction in the world?
Smitaji, first of all, let me clarify. I'm a retired diplomat.
Sir,
I'm a former diplomat. But nonetheless, even a common person knows that reports like this gain currency and are deliberately given prominence for political purposes.
right.
Because of the fact that there is a conscious attempt being made to run down the government of India and to score all sort of political points and to run a political agenda. Now, I once again raise these questions which you very pertinently asked. Who are these people who have issued this report? Frankly
Yes.
speaking, they call themselves the Freedom House. But having seen media reports about whatever they have written, I'm convinced that these people are catering to the political agenda of vested interests. So, as far as I'm concerned, I do not attach any importance whatsoever to whatever has been said in the report. And as far as I'm concerned, again, I would
I will
throw this report into the dustbin.
I
That
will
is
come
where
back.
it
I
belongs.
will come back to you on that, sir, about how much importance India or any other country should accord to such reports. But before that, let me bring in my other guest, Kartikeya Tanna here. Kartikeya Tanna, you are connected to me straight from the US, and I'm sure you know more than us how the people think over there, what inspires or leads to such reports being generated, or all such activities. But Mr. Prabhu raised a very pertinent question here. He said they always operate with a political agenda in mind. My simple and straight question is, agreed that they may have a political agenda. Why should anybody in the US, in the establishment, in the larger commentariat there, would want to run down a country like India? How does it help anybody at all?
Well, Smitaji, the US has consistently been offering its gratuitous advice on different countries in the world. They interfere in several countries. We have seen that through covert or overt means they've interfered in elections throughout the world.
Right.
So this is not something new that they're commenting on the so-called freedom ratings or freedom index of a country. But honestly, if you read the report, Freedom House report should be accompanied with a tagline that it's freedom from facts, because it hasn't merely distorted the map of India. I mean, we have seen how the entire state of Jammu and Kashmir was taken out
Yes,
from the
I
map
was
when they
coming to
had.
that. Yes.
But you see, this is it has also distorted history, not just the map. And this is a consistent strategy by history deniers. Remember the 2002 riots? It was widely labeled as a pogrom against Muslims, a genocide, when one
Yes, yes,
fourth of those
very
who
much.
actually died in those riots were Hindus. And what preceded those riots were the ghastly incident where the 59 Hindu car savers were burnt alive. in the Delhi riots as well, which is actually one of the things that's mentioned in this report by Freedom House, or I should say Freedom from Facts report. They cleverly omit how the intelligence bureau officer Ankit Sharma was butchered in the most inhumane way, but they
Yes, yes,
present it as if just one
yes,
side,
we.
that as if just one side was under attack. And a few hours ago, you might have seen
What
Time
you are
magazine's
saying,
cover.
Kartikeya, is deliberate omission of facts, suppression of facts, etc., and also trying to project things in a perhaps a predetermined manner. But before
Yes.
we discuss that a little more, I just wanted to have a view on from you here, because we have spoken to experts earlier, and there are very clearly two divided views here. One says India, being a country which is rising so well in the global scheme of things, we need to take the world opinion seriously, carefully, and we need to calibrate our position. The other view says if India is a confident, aspirational, growing country, why should we care what anybody writes, most particularly the Western world? Which of the two views do you think is more convincing? What, according to you, should be our way of looking at it?
Well, I mean, we are an interconnected world, so there's there's no merit in actually ignoring something that happens in the world. At the
Okay.
same time, at the same time, we should never we should always keep introspecting. We should always keep evolving. We should always make sure that our institutions are strengthened. And if it takes a report to tell us that, so be it. But the problem is we have to also understand the antecedents of this report. We have to understand who are behind these reports. And I think Op India, I would recommend your viewers to read this article by Op India. They have done an extensive investigation into who actually supports this organization. And it turns out that apparently the U.S. government gives grants to Freedom House, and the Trump administration actually wanted
Yes,
to
we have seen
stop
those
this.
reports.
The Trump administration wanted to discontinue these grants. So while we should not necessarily ignore everything that is done in the West, we should pay attention to it to understand who our enemies are and how inimical those interests to us are. I think that's where we should pay attention. And yes, in the process, if there are certain things that the report mentions, or any other neutral commentator says, certain things that are lacking in India, we should definitely pay attention to it. After all, we have to become a strong economy. You have to become a strong force to reckon with, and there's no harm in introspecting at all.
So let me get Mr. Prabhu Dayal on that once more before I come back to you, Kartikeya. Mr. Dayal, I was just looking at some of the major points that have been raised by the Freedom House report, and I don't know really which of them to mention and which not. It is such a long list. However, there is one very relevant and an important question raised about the funding of such organization. Right now, the context is the Freedom House, which operates as an NGO. Do you think the funding pattern being opaque, it raises questions about what they have in mind? Also, the diversity of the panel. I mean, 40 or even if it is 50 people sitting in a land far away from India, can they really understand the sensitivities, the diversity, the entire mind of an Indian? Your take, sir.
Well, I repeat what I said earlier, that
Okay.
organizations like this so-called Freedom House serve a political agenda. And far from really understanding India, they serve the interests of those people who want to malign India.
Who
This
could they be?
report, if you look carefully at this report, it is extremely biased. And it talks about the fact that India has dropped a few points in terms of the democracy values, etc. But the fact is, who gives these people the sort of authority to judge us? Now,
Exactly.
the fact of the matter is that India is as good a democracy, as free a democracy, as open a society as any that you can come across in the West. There is full freedom to criticize the government. If you look at the media, if you look at whatever is said in terms of, on television channels, you would be amazed how much freedom is enjoyed by people here. And the fact of the matter is that this sort of freedom is not enjoyed by many countries in the West. Now,
Okay.
where does the Freedom House get its statistics? Who are the people whom it questions? this is all extremely suspicious. I am greatly suspicious of the manner in which this report has been prepared and of the agenda which it is serving. So, as I said earlier, as far as I'm concerned,
So,
this
therefore, sir,
report goes into
there
the
is an
dustbin.
obvious question here. Allow me a question which is very obvious at this point. Since you said you are really suspicious of the manner in which such reports are brought out, you having served in very senior capacities, from your experience, your understanding, who do you think and what is the manner do you think is adopted to prepare these reports? Very briefly.
Well, it's the enemies of India. Countries which want to malign India finance such organizations. And such organizations always end up serving their masters. He who pays the piper calls the tune. And the tune which is being sung by organizations like the Freedom House has clearly been dictated by those countries which want to malign us. So
Right, sir.
I think
So
that's my
that
clear
raises
answer.
so
Yes.
that's a very serious allegation, but then I'm sure we need to understand it a little more. So I'll come back to you on that. But just before that, let me bring in Kartikeya Tanna here. Kartikeya, when we talk of a democracy, I, I and people like me, we presume that in a democracy, the first stamp of approval and perhaps the most potent power, the most potent tool in the hands of the people is their voting right. When a certain government, in this case the Narendra Modi government, which has found too much mention in this Freedom House report, when a government gets complete approval, absolute support, and majority favor from the voters of the country, who are the ultimate deciders in a democracy, how or what is the legitimacy of an organization, whether based in India or abroad, to say that democracy is less functional or dysfunctional or in question? We have even read some publications of the Western world, most particularly the USA, saying that it is time India should forego its title as a democracy. So, I mean, who finally decides? Is it the voter of India or is it a set of people having a certain set of thinking sitting in some faraway land?
Oh, Smitaji, of course. I mean, what India is and how India is decided by Indians primarily. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And why these reports have legitimacy or whether they have legitimacy, it depends on whether the reader chooses to give it legitimacy. I mean,
Right.
and unfortunately, what has happened is that most of India would likely ignore this, but there's one political party, which is the main opposition political party, that has actually plugged this report on its Twitter account and has essentially maligned India as well. And again, I keep saying this again and again and again. They hate Narendra Modi more than they love India, which is why they try to take recourse to these reports because they've lost favor with the electorate in India. So they
So
try to take recourse.
that raises a very important query here. Do you think there are elements within India with whom it suits to have such reports come out from the Western world, and so they might
Quite
actually be
possible.
feeding the kind of stuff that we are seeing coming out these days? Is that
Of
your
course.
doubt?
Of course, Mitaji, how else would an organization sitting over there get information about things that are happening in India? Of course, there's someone in
Right,
India who's giving them
right.
one view. They're cutting the history into half and giving them the view that they want India to be known by. And unfortunately, what happens is that this report is then published in several newspapers, mainstream newspapers and magazines. And so many of my friends over here who are not really aware in depth of Indian issues, they come and ask me that is it true that this is what has happened? Is it true that Muslims were butchered? And again, like there's they have been successful in achieving what they wanted to,
So
which is to
let me
spread
so
propaganda
let me
against
just
India.
allow me to ask you a very quick one, and then I'll come back to Mr. Dayal. There are a lot of issues still on the table that I want to understand from both of you. Being an Indian, a nationalist Indian who is residing in the US, how do you engage with these people? How do you answer these queries?
Well, I tell them the facts. First of all, I understand if they're open to understanding facts rather
Okay,
than just
right.
go by one narrative. And thankfully, what has happened because of President Trump is that these newspapers, mainstream newspapers, have been discredited so much that they understand that not everything that's reported in these newspapers is gospel. And if
Right.
they're open to facts, I tell them the facts. I tell them with links if they want. I back it up with evidence, just like a lawyer would. And I tell them, listen, if you're open minded about it, let's have a discussion about it. I'll give you evidence, I'll give you proof, I'll give you facts, and then we can discuss.
Absolutely. Right. So, point taken. Let me bring in Mr. Prabhu Dayal here. Sir, I have one very quick query from you, and then I have another more in-depth question, rather a far-reaching question to ask from you, a forward-looking thing. But before that, what do you think an Indian like Kartikeya who is residing abroad, and he says that there are people sitting within India who may be feeding these NGOs or think tanks or activists. Do you agree to that view?
Smita, having served the government of India in various countries, I can tell you that Indians living abroad are more patriotic perhaps than Indians living here.
Then why
You
these,
can
sir?
take an Indian out of India, but you can't take India out of an Indian. That is the
Perfect,
sublime
perfect.
truth. Now, what really needs to be done by people who are living abroad, I think they should rebut criticism of this nature, and they should point out that while, of course, a lot of the funding of organizations like Freedom House comes from the US government, some funding also comes from public corporations and from individuals.
Right,
So,
right.
who are these individuals? Which corporations are funding? So, there has to be more transparency. So, I think Indians living in the United States can call for more transparency in the functioning of organizations like Freedom House, which I repeat serve the agenda of countries which want to malign India. There is a definite political agenda behind reports like this which have been issued. And I think the
Absolutely,
government
sir.
of India has already made matters
That
very clear. The
that
government
brings
of
me to
India
the
has
next
very
question,
clearly
sir.
said that
Yes.
this report is highly biased and should not be taken very serious notice of.
Before I come to the next question on the table, I would like to say that views are clearly divided over how seriously these reports need to be taken and what they mean for India. I also spoke earlier to political analyst and fellow at the Center for Policy Research, Rahul Verma. Let's listen in to what Rahul had to say on such reports.
Last week, The Economist released its global democracy rankings, and there has been a lot of discussions happening on these. There are also, so these rankings are of course useful for academic exercises and purposes, but in the public domain, the way these rankings are put out, there are lots of criticism. And one major reasons for this criticism is that people do not know who these experts behind the rankings are, because these are expert based ranking, and second, what are the criteria that are being used to make such rankings. In the current ranking, the India has slipped 2 positions from 51 to 53 between 2019 and 2020. One shouldn't for academicians this matters, and people look at these small differences, but for general public, governments and policy makers, these small fluctuation shouldn't make much difference, and there are reasons. One reason is that the concepts which these rankings use are very wide. So it's not just the small concept of electoral democracies, but economist democracy rankings are made up of 5 components, which has 60 questions. And these questions kind of include whether civil servants can effectively implement government policies, the freedom of press, how people can participate in elections, parties, election finance. So there are so many components that one doesn't this is not just measuring democracy, but lot many other things.
Actually, I was just yesterday, I was speaking to a friend, a diplomat just retired and a very clear minded and very dedicated officer, but at the same time, staunchly nationalist like you. He was telling me that people only take notice of someone who demands notice. And the way India has come up in the global scheme of things in the last few years, the way we tackled COVID, the way we have ensured last mile delivery to the citizens, all these things, our economy, this has made the world take notice. People are sitting up and taking notice. And that is why there are powers and elements who are out to denigrate and demean us. Do you agree to it? And do you agree that India's new standing in the global arena has triggered so much reaction?
Well, India's success is bound to generate jealousy. And there are several countries which do not like the fact that India is doing so well.
Right.
And organizations like Freedom House, and there are plenty of such organizations, are easy to use for anti India propaganda. So you're right, India's success has made a lot of countries envious, and they are acting as per their envious reaction. Let me, however, state very categorically, we need to be a little more thick skinned when it comes to reports like this.
Correct.
We take every criticism far too seriously and we give importance to such organizations, whereas in reality, they do not deserve any importance whatsoever. So I repeat what I said earlier. That this organization's objectives, its motives are extremely suspect, and its report should be taken not just with a pinch of salt, but a
A
huge
sack of salt?
quantity of salt. Huge quantity of salt. That is what it's reported. It is extremely dubious in nature.
All right. Kartikeya Tanna, I know you do not completely subscribe to this view because you have always held the view that India must counter, there must be a counter narrative from our side. We have to answer, even if it is some vested interests only. Nevertheless, we need to take it seriously. So I'll come to you on that and ask you, we know that this has been happening back to back. I have read the Washington Post, the NYT, the Economist, and now this report. There have been similar reports in the past. What do you think is the best way to counter these reports to make our arguments widely circulated in the global audience, but at the same time continue with our strides and progress?
No, Smitaji, I must clarify. I'm not saying that we should, take every report seriously, but what we
Right.
should do is we should understand the antecedents behind the report. We should understand the intent behind the report. We should understand who is behind that report, because
Right.
it's important to understand whose interests are inimical to ours as we grow further. Now, having said that, how do we counter this? If there's a need to counter, well, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So you put out facts in the public domain, you let informed people read those facts if they want to, but if they want to buy the propaganda, there's nothing that can stop them. And again, this is freedom of speech. Democracies enjoy freedom of speech. So an organization in America had decided to give out points when no one really asked for them for any points, but they've done that anyways. So let them do it. Let them do what they want. If it is something that we as a country in India need to pay attention, if we think it deserves and merits attention, then we adopt the sunlight is the best disinfectant policy.
But they are not going to publish. I mean, the publications which we have been talking about, they simply ignore anything that does not suit their agenda. They refuse to publish.
Yeah, but which is why programs like yours, which is why platforms like Twitter, like Facebook, thankfully they haven't started banning the other point of view yet. But
Yes.
there's still democratization of opinion. And there's blogs and articles and other things that we can write if there's a need to. Again, I'm saying if there's a need to counter it, if we know that this is a clear agenda driven organization. And the reason why I think this particular report should be paid attention to is because the Indian National Congress, the oldest party, the party that fought freedom for India, actually plugged it. If they didn't plug it, I think it would have been a footnote in Indian news. But because they plugged it, because they've relied on it, I think that becomes a serious issue, because it's an Indian political party, the principal opposition party, which is actually relying on this
That is
report.
using the report to further their
Yeah.
political attack.
Exactly,
Yes,
which is
your,
why we
your
shouldn't
point
take
is well
this.
taken.
Yeah.
Understood. So, Mr. Prabhu Dayal, I'm sorry, I'm just completely running out of time. So I just have time enough to request you. You want to add anything to that? A quick concluding remark, sir, on how we should tackle these reports?
You
They
know,
have to answer at some level.
this report criticizes India for the manner in which it treats the Muslim minority. But the
Yes, sir.
government of India has made it very, very clear in its rebuttal that the government treats all citizens as equal as enshrined under the Indian Constitution. Now, I may also point out that this report criticizes the government for the lockdowns enforced and ordered during the COVID 19 phase. Now, we all know that it is because of the handling of the
Exactly.
situation by the government that this pandemic did not grow as it could have grown. So, the very fact
Yeah.
that the government is being criticized for something that it did so remarkably well shows the very biased nature of the report, because every Indian realizes that the COVID-19 situation could have been much, much worse than it was had it not
Right.
been for the lockdowns and for the manner in which the government enforced its
Very well
policies
put,
in
sir.
this regard.
Very well put. We ran the largest relief and relief program for the migrants. The migrants seem to have found a lot of mention in this report. That is why I am saying this. We ran the largest relief program for the migrants during the lockdown period, and those relief measures continue to be distributed, may I add. Also, when the report talks about problems with India's federal structure, may I repeat here that if we just look at the record of previous governments in exercising the Article 356 of the Constitution compared to the present regime, perhaps it would be a little more enlightening. But on that note, I am afraid I have completely run out of time this evening. Perhaps we shall have to come back to this issue in one of these episodes very soon, and I will like to connect to both of you again. Thank you very much to both the gentlemen here, Kartikeya
Thank
Tanna, Mr. Prabhu Dayal, for connecting to us on such short notice. And I shall come back to you one of these weekends to have a deeper understanding of the issues. Thank you once again. With that, viewers, it's time to say goodnight on Media Scan. But do keep watching DD India as we continue to scan the media for you.